So a year ago, I made a video about gain staging and my method for what worked for me and how I set levels. And a year later, just recently, I released another video that didn't necessarily correct that one, but just kind of updated my workflow, how it's changed. But the idea was very similar in how I use normalization to get my levels to be right in the mix before I add any processing and before I actually start to mix. I wanted to make another video though, because there still seems to be some confusion and some things that I want to address that I could help clarify. Gain staging for me is setting levels before I start to mix and maintaining levels throughout the mix so that I'm not confused, that my workflow improves and I'm focused more so on mixing rather than damage control because the levels are all over the place. So it's for me, it works for me, and this particular style of gain staging that I'm showing is just what I do. And I'm sharing it because you might be like, I've never did that before. I've never used a limiter to gain stage. One of the things that I feel needed to be addressed was, one, me just showing you in real time, looking at the session before I even add any limiter to gain stage, and then start adding them to show you what I mean by setting the kick at -6 and the snare at -10. Like, what does that sound like instead of just talking about it? And then also what happens at the drum bus stage and the drum bass bus stage, the mix bus stage. Like, what happens when these signals combine? How do you maintain that -6? Because for me, I believe what works best is if my kick is that anchor element in the mix, that's going to be the loudest one, and everything is going to pretty much fall either at that level or underneath it, I'm going to try to maintain that -6 as like the ceiling of my mix. That becomes like my 0 dBFS until the actual mix bus stage where the mastering and all of that processing really brings it up to 0 dBFS. So it is just a system of control for me. And that's it. The way that I see it is that I have like this kick drum right here, right in my face. And I'm trying to, if it's this, I'm trying to make it like this. Bring out as much beef and meat out of the kick as I possibly can. Now, everything else, the way that I see it, falls like underneath the kick. So you have like the bass here and the instruments out here and the vocals like somewhere there. I just see it like that. So the kick is always going to be front and center. And I have to make sure that if that's hitting at -6, that just makes sense to me that everything is going to I'm going to work to make sure everything falls somewhere in that field. Make sense? So this is a session. I made a beat today, and this is just raw right from my beat machine. And I didn't really do any level setting, just minor like fader adjustments in the beat machine so that I could hear what I'm doing, but I didn't apply any gain staging when making the beat. So what you're going to hear right now is just raw right from the beat machine. So let's go ahead and start with how we're going to gain stage this mix the Dax way. So I have 3 kicks. I got a kick main, I got a more of like a subby punchy kick, and I have a live kick, which is going to provide like the top end kind of detail for the kick. And those get routed to our kick aux track so that I have all the kicks on one fader and I don't got to worry too much about these. And I got 2 snares, which get routed to a snare aux in the same way. The hats and tambourine and open hat and shaker, those are all going to get routed to my perks bus. And I'm going to do more of a blend with these after I do my gain staging because I don't want all my hi-hats to hit the same way. So now I got my kick, my snare, my perks going to my drum bus. So one of the concerns was when you get your kick hitting -6 and your snare hitting -10, when they play by themselves at the drum bus, it's going to be peaking at -6. But when the hi-hats come in, you can probably rest assured that you're going to get some increase in peak level. So that's something that I wanted to address, is how do you hit the mix bus and still be at -6? And I'm just going to start and I'll just kind of detail what I'm doing as I'm going over it, but you'll see what it is that I do. So we got our 3 kicks playing. All I'm going to do is put my L1 on there. Boom. So first kick here, we'll go ahead and play that. Okay, so this kick is hitting at -7.2, right? So my limiter is going to show that as the input. So I'm just going to, for the sake of keeping everything uniform here, -6. Obviously, when 3 kicks hit together, it's not going to be -6 at the kick aux, but this is just what I'm setting it out. So I'm not going to try to do the math between each kick so that they all equal -6. Too much work. So -7.2. So I drove 7.2 decibels into this limiter, hitting a -6 ceiling. So all I'm doing is just lowering the output to -6. So when the kick leaves this channel to go wherever it's going to go, it's going to be at -6. Now we're going to have these 3 kicks playing. So this is a prime example of what happens when multiple signals combine at an aux, and you're going to get an obvious level jump. So it's not -6, it's going to be hitting the kick bus at -1.1. So all I'm going to be doing here is -6 output ceiling. And here is why it's cool that I can use a limiter, because maybe with these 3 kicks here, maybe I want to actually put some limiting on to start bringing out some more of the body of the kick and reducing some of the transient. So maybe I'll do like a -3. So now I'm getting almost 2 dBs of gain reduction, and I might just like the sound of that for the kick. So now the kick is hitting at -6. So I'm just going to go ahead and move along with the snare and do the same thing. I'll just copy and paste these limiters here and see where the snare is hitting. And we're going to go for -10. So the snare, -6.2. We're going to drive 6.2 into the limiter and output ceiling set at -10. Let's hear how it sounds. A good start for me is -10. And again, that's just what works for me, because I like to have the snare in your face, but slightly lower than the kick. It's just my mix preference for the genre that I primarily mix in. This is still part of my beginning stages of gain staging, is just making sure that everything is hitting this channel at the level that I want. So maybe I like this snare more than this snare, and this is just providing some kind of support. And that's obviously going to change the peak indicator here. So let's see. We're at -2.7. Now we're going to be at -8, right? So now that's going to change how I set the limiter, just because I wanted to set the balance of the 2 signals to sound better together as one. So we'll just keep it like that for now. And we're peaking out here at -10 on the snare. So that's cool. Let's bring in the hi-hat. And remember, like I said, we are hitting this drum bus here at -6. We're hitting the drum bass bus at -6. And again, we're hitting our mix bus at -6. So the kick is the loudest element here. There's no snare involvement in the overall level. So we're good so far. And just for practice, I would put the L1 here on the drum bus, or I would put a clipper. And maybe what I would do is to make sure that everything is going to be hitting the drum bus at -6 and then drive some level into a clipper. Either way, because with clippers, I like to have control over how much is hitting it. So if I put a clipper on first and I'm like -3 or -2 or whatever and not -6, then that clipper is going to be shaving off 4 dB potentially of transient. And that might sound good, but I like to have control of how much I drive into the clipper. So if I set the limiter at -6 and then I take that level and drive it into the clipper, I can throw 2, 3, or even 4 dB into it, and it would be the same thing as if I didn't have the limiter on first and it was just clipping that signal off. But at least I have control over how much is going to go into it. So that's just the way my mind works, and I get a result that I like. So for now, we're just going to put the limiter on, and we're going to set that output ceiling to -6, and we're going to see when we add the percussion stuff in just how much the signal is going to actually increase. So with the hi-hats, like I said, that is going to be at -18 as a starting place for me. And again, the idea came from the Mixing Engineer's Handbook, which gave me a rough outline of kind of presetting levels at certain levels. So certain instruments hitting at a certain level, and it kind of gives you a balance before you actually start to mix so you can hear things better. So the drum bus here is actually hitting at -4.2. So with everything added over the kick, we're actually 2 decibels louder with the hi-hats being added in. So what we can do is set this level at -4.2. Now our drum bus is peaking at -6. So if we don't limit this and set this ceiling to be -6, which still sounds good, then we're going to lose some level. But that's okay, because we're just gain staging right now. We're just getting our peak indicators and our levels to read what makes sense to our mind. So for me, it's -6 across the board. So I'm not worried about, oh, like when the hi-hats came in and the way that I set the threshold, I lost a couple dB in level. I'm going to work on that when I actually start adding processing to get that average signal up in level and reducing the peaks. But right now we're just getting things to read -6, and that's what works for me. So now let's add in the bass. So -5.9, and the bass I usually set at -10 to -12. We'll set it at -12 for now, and let's see what our drum and bass bus read. So that adds a decibel of level, and we're gonna go ahead and control that and make sure that this is peaking at -6 as well. And there we go, drum bass peaking at -6. The goal for me now is, because I got these levels set this way, every plugin that I add afterwards, I like to keep the level of what goes into the plugin relatively the same as what comes out. That's why I set up my gain staging this way, because I like the balance at these levels. Of course, if I feel that the bass needs to be louder after I added the processing, I will address that. But if I need to add more level for something at the end, and like the bass hitting at -12 is not good enough, then I'll just increase the output of the last processor or put a limiter on at the end and just drive more signal into that ceiling or whatever. I mean, I'll just adjust it as I feel it's needed. But generally for me, and at -10 to -12 works great for the bass. -18 to -20 works great for anything percussive. So same thing here with the instruments. We're gonna go ahead and apply limiting across all of these to get a good level. At the mix bus stage, we are at -4.1. No clipping, no headaches, and we haven't even started mixing yet. We provided a balance in putting the instruments where you can hear it sounds balanced, like you hear everything before you start having to create pockets and EQ and do all that stuff. But what I would do now is say, okay, the mix bus is hitting -4.1, give or take. I'm going to set a limiter. And again, everything is going to drive into this -6 ceiling. We're going to set this to -4.1. If we have a dB or so of limiting happening, that's okay. We can always adjust if we don't want it, but this is going to be what my mix bus is going to sound like. We haven't done anything yet to control the dynamics of anything. I just don't want the signal peaking over -6. That's just me, and that's my way. So I hope this makes sense to anybody that was wondering what happens when the signals combine and I'm hitting a level higher than this -6. If you don't want to gain stage and this makes no sense to you, then just move on and just mix how you want to mix. But I hope that this provided somebody with a different strategy, because for me, as much as I've been mixing over these years, I've always tried to find the way that's like the best way to gain stage. For some reason, that level of organization just always mattered to me. What is this person doing? How are they gain staging? Oh, this guy's using a VU meter. I'm going to try that. This guy uses the trim control on a certain plugin. I'm going to try that. And I just never liked the randomness of that. I just liked having things set at a certain level. Now I can start making things sound much better. That's it. So if you want to go back and watch the first video, if you're new here, then that's going to show up on the screen. The second video, which I made more recently, is also going to show up on the screen. And leave a comment and let me know if this makes sense to you. And of course, I'm here to answer any questions as thoroughly as I possibly can. And let me know if this works out for you. Until the next video, God bless you.